Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author, Danielle Girard. The Killer Women Vodcast is pleased to be a part of the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. To learn more about Danielle and her books, visit her at www.daniellegirard.com, and to access all of our vodcasts, go to youtube.com/Authors on the Air. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello and welcome to Killer Women. I am your host, Danielle Girard, and today I am with two fabulous authors whose new books are out on the same day. They are book twins. And to my right, I'm going to do this the whole time because the screen shows me different sides, but to my right is Hannah Morrissey, and Hannah's second book, The Widowmaker, is coming out on December 6th. Hannah's over here. Okay, and then to my left is Tessa Wegert, and Tessa's book, oh gosh, there we go. Oh, I'm covering her face. Saying do this the whole time. Can you see it? The Kind to Kill is coming out, and this is the fourth book in the Shana Merchant series. I've read both of them. These are fabulous books, and actually, these ladies who, if they look a little bit different on the screen, we got some very dark light things going on here. Yeah. Fabulous. The books actually have some really fun commonalities. So let's start. Hannah, tell us a little bit about The Widowmaker.
Yeah, so The Widowmaker, it is a follow-up to Hello Transcriber, but it has different protagonists, so we do return to Black Harbor. But the protagonist we're working with this time, we have a detective named Hudson, and he's grieving the loss of his partner who was murdered. And then we have Morgan, a photographer, and she gets a gig shooting a holiday party for a wealthy family who's totally enshrouded in mystery since their patriarch went missing 20 years ago. And then, through some sort of cataclysmic happening, I don't want to give anything away, but she and Hudson kind of become connected. So you have this unlikely pair who are not only trying to solve a murder, but also a cold case. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, Tessa, tell us about The Kind to Kill.
Yeah, so it's the fourth book in the Shana Merchant series. And I think anyone who, I also don't want to give too much away, but anyone who's read to this point knows, and I will reveal that there is a blood connection between Shana Merchant and this serial killer that she's been pursuing for a really long time. And at the beginning of this book, you discover that there is to some extent a threat that has been neutralized, but he's still very much a part of her life. He's still kind of this shadow looming over her and kind of haunting her daily life and also her career as she continues to investigate crimes in the Thousand Islands. And then a tourist who has come to a local pirate festival goes missing, and Shana finds herself embroiled in this scandal, trying to work with the locals in the Chamber of Commerce to figure out, what has happened to this tourist in the midst of this very high profile summer event that draws a lot of attention.
Right.
And
the town is flooded with pirates, literally.
Flooded with pirates and tourists.
Yes.
It's not the best time for someone to go missing.
It's not right. And nobody wants to talk about it because of course they need the income in this small town. So Let's just start with sort of these incredible women, because of course, here we are, killer women. These incredible women with these really we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, these violent pasts, both one sort of from childhood and one in a different way a little bit later. But let's talk about sort of what makes those women who they are. I think, and we can start with Shana because we've gotten to know her over these four books. And you do talk about sort of that she had a blood relation to a serial killer, which it turns out that's a lot of violence. But she carries that. Talk to us just about sort of her psyche now that as you said, that a threat has sort of been, part of that threat has been eliminated, but it lasts for we see that is a big part of the first three books. And yet, even though it's that some part of it is no longer pressure, it's still there for her. So what's that like for her?
Yeah, when we first meet Shana in Death in the Family, she's still suffering from PTSD after an abduction experience that she had with said serial killer.
Yes.
And that really still follows her throughout the entire series. It's a very much part of her character arc as she's trying to overcome the past, relationship that she had with this particular individual, and also trying to reconcile that with how she operates, in her daily life as an investigator.
Right.
And she's very much thrown into violent situations in her daily job, but also is a survivor herself. So to some extent, she has maybe a deeper understanding for some of the victims that
Right.
she investigates, crimes against those victims.
Right.
And then by the time we reach this book, her real issue is that she's grappling with this legacy that this serial killer has left on the community and also on her own life. So,
and there was collateral damage in the part of this book is actually some collateral damage from that abduction situation coming back to haunt her all these years later. And it's sort of, because of course, when there's violence in anybody's life, it's a ripple, it's a domino, and it affects everybody around, and particularly for police officers, right? It affects, we know this from our jobs and from, getting to know police officers that their lives are fraught with violence, and that doesn't just affect them, but their families, and then their, families and all
and
that.
She's estranged from her family at the beginning of this book as
Right.
well, because, her blood tie, of course, is their blood tie also, and news of this secret is finally out,
Right.
and it's a national news story, and
Right.
so
And she
everyone
tried to protect them,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right. And then weirdly, because of how much the history those two had, Sheena and the serial killer, she somehow gets sort of collaterally also blamed for who that person became.
right.
And yet, and so from her family's perspective, she's actually also sort of part villain, which is, really hard.
Yeah. And there's a whole true crime aspect to this book as well, because there's so much of a focus on this case, this criminal, and what she knew about his identity that she chose not to reveal
Right.
sooner.
Right.
So then she is very much the subject of this, this scandal, this public scandal. But then at the same time, there's a journalist character who comes to her and says, I really want to tell your side of the story.
Right.
As not only, obviously with true crime generally, it's the victim's family that you investigate, in these types of stories and podcasts.
Right.
But this journalist wants to look at what it's like to be related to a serial killer,
Right.
and the collateral damage there, the effect that can have on someone emotionally and psychologically.
Right. And being a police officer in that situation is so unique.
Yeah.
And actually, so Hannah and I were talking. Now let's talk about Morgan. So Morgan is a photographer with also a very, very dark, violent background, and very anti-authority, very untrusting. And she's a really also a product of her experiences. So tell us, how does she where does she come from? How does she evolve? How does she see the world?
Yeah, I think I don't know, anytime in Black Harbor, or I suppose anytime I write with an atmosphere, I like to look at how characters are a product of that environment.
Yeah.
And so in Hello Transcriber, we had Hazel, who's the newcomer. So you're experiencing Black Harbor through her lens for the first time. But then we have, you have Nikolai Cole, who's also a product of his environment. And you see the things that he does, as a, a police detective. But then I wanted to just kind of turn it around and explore something entirely new, and take somebody who's from Black Harbor and coming back.
Yeah.
So see how that product has left Black Harbor and how she's coming back to Black Harbor and how she sees it. So her being a photographer is sort of just this interesting perspective, I guess, of she really is viewing it through a lens. I guess it's kind of like a metaphor where you are seeing everything through Morgan's lens because it is from her point of view. But yeah, just seeing how that violent past that she has shapes who she is and how she interacts with people and her mistrust of people. And she really is anti-authority because nobody helped her when she needed, so she just doesn't
she was very they let her down big time.
So she's become very independent, very rebellious, not always for the right reasons. So
but
understandably.
Yes, exactly. But actually not. But that's also. So we don't make the best decisions.
No.
Humans, right? We know this. And I think for her particularly, she really is driving. She's working through exactly this, what she had available to her, right? And she's a fascinating character, and the whole sort of as you mentioned when you described the book, she gets invited to be this, to photograph this incredible family who live in this, castle, basically. I mean, it's just phenomenal. Yeah. And you do this very well, and you did it with in Transcriber, and you do it here. The sense of place is so, the sense of place and the characters' work, are so intertwined that, you feel like Black Harbor like raises these really interestingly dark people, and that's just how I see the whole town. There must be normal people in Black Harbor, but I haven't met any.
I haven't either. No, well, I think too, like on like the note of seeing it through Morgan's lens, like you have the Reynolds who have this like great estate on this like the crumbling shoreline, but it's like the sea glass colored mansion, and she's driving through and she sees all the topiaries and the fancy shrubs and but it is a nice house. I think it's a big house, but then also like it's from Morgan's perspective, and she comes from like a very poor family, on the other side of the track. So it's going to be even like magnified for her. So I think like, if somebody else saw like the Reynolds' mansion, like how much of a mansion is it? Right.
But to her,
it's massive. Yeah.
Right. And that's, and there's so much of that. I feel like in the book about sort of like the dichotomy, and it's so prevalent in our world, right? The people who have so much, and then the ones who have so little. It's like, and then the spread is so growing. So let's talk about place, because actually we talked a little bit about this before we recorded too, about sort of how the strange similarities of your spots, which are not at all that. They're not similar, but sort of the water element. And so why don't you start and tell us about like where you've been? I know Black Harbor is a made up place, but it's based on a real place. Yeah. And we're on Lake Michigan now in this book. So tell us about sort of like, when you first imagined with Hello Transcriber Black Harbor, like, what was it? What were the elements that you thought you stole from whatever real town that you felt like were really important to that?
I like stole all of them.
Yeah. Perfect.
And it's fictionalized.
Yeah.
No, the bridge was a huge, just a huge facet. And it was a destination for Hazel, right? A lot of people's final destination. Yeah, so I think the bridge was the biggest thing for me. And also like, so Hello Transcriber, the bridge is in the sort of the center of the city, not far from the police department, because she can look at it through her window. But I wanted in The Widowmaker to like kind of move outward and show a different part of Black Harbor that we haven't explored before. And the crumbling shoreline, this erosion was mentioned in Hello Transcriber. So go over there and see, because the people who live on the lake are more well-to-do, pretty like established families and stuff. A lot of people who aren't even from Black Harbor, say from like Chicago, when they get cheap, nice houses like on this crumbling lake. But just kind of looking over there and like what's life like over there, and what are people's perceptions colored by, and sort of this divide of like, because even in Hello Transcriber it's talked about like there's pockets, sort of pockets of good and bad, and like what does this pocket look like over here, I guess.
And of course, just because something looks really nice, it doesn't mean that it is really nice.
And then so I think like, to use your word, like dichotomy of the Reynolds' awesome mansion on this crumbling shoreline, but then you have this vast Lake Michigan, which if people haven't seen Lake Michigan, it looks like the ocean. Yes. And it's cold and it's dark and it's mysterious, and when you bring in something like that, you have this like foreboding sense of like the unknown and ominous, and that something's gonna happen in that lake. And in The Widowmaker, that's kind of where like our whole story begins, is like what they find in that lake. And then you can use that to color characters' fears and reality.
And we have some fear. We have some fearful, some water fearful people.
Yeah. Well, I'm terrified of water. So
yes, I am too. So that probably says a lot about wow,
that is so interesting. Okay, I did not know that about either of you. But water is a big thing. So your town, you base it on a town, but water is, like you said, the bridge. The bridge really is. If when I think about that Hello Transcriber, it's the bridge is the thing, and and this is sort of mixed between that, like you said, the eroding shoreline and that that mansion, which somehow got into my
but also looking at the eroding shoreline is kind of like a parallel or a metaphor for the whole city itself. Like people's it's like their crumbling shoreline and like people's crumbling morals and
Right.
different things like that.
It's it's a metaphor for a lot of things
Yeah.
in the world right now. So water, talk about, so yours is actually a real place.
Yes.
So tell us about where you're located, and then sort of how you've also fictionalized it to sort of protect businesses, and
right.
you don't want to make anyone too angry. Is there really a pirate festival?
There is really a pirate festival. I was there just this past
And
summer.
here we go.
Yes. How come we were next year?
Next year, it's
Yeah.
every year. It's everything that I describe it to be. It's very eclectic. It absolutely takes over this town for, it used to be 10 days long, and now it really just runs for a weekend.
Yeah.
But I mean, everyone shows up dressed as a pirate, and there's, limited edition pirate ice cream flavors at the local ice cream shop. And
what's a pirate ice cream flavor? I'm
Well,
afraid to ask.
I didn't
Chips
realize
Ahoy.
exactly. The one that I got was called Buried Treasure.
Oh,
but I
see,
made one up for the book that I think is like black licorice and banana.
Oh,
was
yeah.
what I came up with. Seemed piratey for some reason.
So,
And also a little revolting.
Yes,
I
right.
would need that. No.
I don't think I would
no.
either. I like black licorice and bananas, but
Just not together.
oh, I love black licorice.
Yeah.
Okay,
But it's a real festival, and actually, this book takes place almost entirely in the town of Alexandria Bay, which is a real town in the Thousand Islands of upstate New York. And it's Shayna's new community, where she has now lived there for a year or so.
Yeah.
And she's settling in, but she also, because of all of the drama going on with, do we want to pause to turn it off?
It's fucking Danny Palmer. Well, I like black licorice and I like bananas, but not together. That sounds, it does.
It is a little bit revolting, and I don't know that I would want to taste it either, but for the purposes of the book, it seems just right.
It sounds, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I love that you made your own. So you're in this town, like you said, it's a real town, it's a real place.
Yes.
But you change it to sort of not make everybody in the town.
Yeah, I mean, I
Right.
wanted, and I, a lot of authors, so Hannah is a perfect example. A lot of authors choose to be inspired by a particular real life location and then fictionalize it, change the name, change enough about it that maybe someone who had never been there would never be able to figure out exactly where it was, which town this was.
Right.
With this series, I've been visiting the Thousand Islands every summer for 20 years.
Yeah.
So, and I was so connected to this town, and I knew it so well. And I liked the idea of capturing it in some way in fiction. And it always seemed like the perfect place to have a mystery series, because it has interesting history, and there are similar to the Reynolds family, how there are a lot of older historic homes that are just really imposing, and a lot of islands and a lot of opportunity to create these kind of locked room scenarios. And the town itself is interesting too, because there's this real divide between the locals who serve the tourists and the tourists who come in every summer. It's really a seasonal town in real life and actuality. So the tourist aspect really comes into play with this particular book. But at the same time, if there is any kind of crime or any, particularly potentially an offensive scene that I'm writing about a location in Alexandria Bay, I do change and also just for my own, to give myself some creative license. I don't necessarily,
you don't have to be like,
I
this
want
is
people
the
to focus
gas
on
station and 3 doors down is where that person died.
Like, oh, the paint trim is not red, it's green. I would rather people just focus on what's happening in the story and not harp too much on those particular details.
But it's a unique location too, because like in one of the books, it's right on the border of Canada.
Yes.
So in one of the books, there's that sort of like, who's in charge of this case, because the body was found in one place, but the person was from the other. And that was the last book.
Yeah, that was Finland.
And
there are a lot of,
which is so fun. And it has this whole, sorry, that was my child. I'm like, my phone keeps buzzing. So we're going to just ignore that. Sorry.
Honestly, I really like that you had that in there with the whole, like, the border who does it, because you see that in real life. Like, real life police stories where sometimes we have, like where I'm from, is it the cities or is it the county?
Right.
You know, and it's like, find a body floating in the water. If it's floating in the water, it's the counties. If it's washed up on shore, it's the cities.
Yeah.
Like,
It's so interesting, right?
And don't you too, as readers, I always love to know those types of details.
Me
and I like
too.
to know that it's authentic and accurate.
Yeah.
And so, I think like we both have done extensive research, but Hannah, you in particular have your police connection from working as a police transcriber in the past.
Being married to a police officer. Right?
So your research maybe comes more easily than mine. I actually tried to pigeonhole him in the bar last night. To try to ask him police, related procedural questions.
I think they're so nice. Like if you call them, I cold called the San Francisco Police Department and been like, I'm an author, my character is a cop, and I want to get this thing right. Yeah. Especially when you say like that, because I think they're probably used to being beat up most of the time now, the police. Yeah. And so when you say, they're wonderful.
Yeah, they always, everyone I've ever spoken with has been really generous with their time and really committed to getting the facts right. And also I think excited about the fact that they're inspiring this, or that they're, some aspect of their lives is going to be somehow portrayed in our books.
I think too, like just as their careers are so interesting to us, like ours are interesting to them.
Right.
It's just a world that they don't live in.
Exactly.
And to like get to kind of step foot a little bit in each other's worlds is fun to have that crossover. But I think even like, with your example with the Border Patrol, it's like that's the kind of stuff that grounds fiction in reality. Yeah. And like shows a reader, like it makes it more relatable. It feels like part of our actual world.
Right.
So I think, and you do it really well because you're not like over explaining or like here's all the mechanics of how this happens. Like this is just a scenario and a conversation between characters. Like this is another arm of another layer of the conflict, I guess.
And you do that so well too, and it's really important to be authentic like that, I think, because let's face it, our plots are not necessarily the most most Like there has never been a serial killer in upstate New York.
Yes.
Right? So
you know of.
That we know of. But it's funny because there's a sheriff that the actual real life sheriff of Jefferson County always lets me interview her with every book. Yeah. And it's come to the point now where my plots have gone so far beyond what she has ever experienced in her year, 30 years or whatever of doing this job. And before that, she worked as a senior investigator herself, like Shayna. But she, with this book, had to say to me, I can tell you what I think would happen under those circumstances, but nothing like that has ever happened here. Nothing happens in the sleepy town. Which is the whole point of using that town for a murder mystery series, right?
So fun.
That's what makes it interesting.
Well, I think that I was thinking about that too, as you were talking about, the tourist body popping up, and during this busy time is kind of this seasonal town where, you have Alexandria Bay and I have Black Harbor, and it's like, because yours is a small town with like locals, kind of everybody knows everybody. So then when you have a murder like that happen, it's like big news all over. Yeah. Whereas my Black Harbor, it's so oversaturated, like it has to be something that's big and going to make the headlines, because like these people are so used to crime. Yeah. They're like,
oh, another murder?
Yeah, another one bites the dust.
Which is actually, so let's talk about this, because this is another thing we talked about, because, both of these, you guys both have a really they're very atmospheric. They're very dark, which I love. So that, to me, that's a compliment, even though I don't know how it comes across. But like the sort of dark stories, characters with lots of stuff, like all that, and I love that about them. But you guys don't do the sort of like open up and like the body is being chopped into little bits. There's not a lot of blood on the page. So talk about that. Like you start. What was the decision? Was it just sort of happened? Were you avoiding it? Is your experience of actual police make it sort of less appealing? Like what's the
No, I think a lot of it comes to like what kind of book you want to write and what kind of audience you want to appeal to. So I tend to, like, in my first or second drafts, write more violence on the page than my editor likes. So we kind of like, she'll have me like tailor it back. So she'd rather have too much than not enough. So like then I have to like figure out and add stuff, so we kind of like do this sort of waltz together where we'll, so what I can have on the page versus off the page. But I think it goes back to like sort of that like threat of violence always being there, and like the scars that the characters have, whether they're internal or external. But you don't want to like turn people off, and I don't like violence just for the sake of violence. Like there has to be a reason for it, and there has, like, you have to care about the character who is doing it or who it's happening to.
Right.
So I like violence that's like rooted in reason.
Right.
I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rather than gratuitous.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, not
that-
gratuitous.
That makes total sense. And same with you.
I just have kind of a weak stomach when it comes to graphic violence. So I just don't want to write a lot of gory scenes. So I mean, there are scenes, of course, where you discover the body and there's some description of the body. The murders, for the most part, happen off the page, off screen. Which, I mean, I like to focus on the puzzle box aspect of the books. Like that's just what is most interesting to me as a writer, is figuring out how to help the reader suss out
You
the
both
clues
both do that. That's real, like both of you guys. It is sort of like a little chess match that you're working through.
They're not classic mysteries,
No.
I wouldn't say either series, but there are definitely elements of that.
There's a root there for sure.
With more of maybe more of a thriller treatment.
Yes.
I would say too, that's a good point about like what you want to focus on, because I think there are some things that should be left to the imagination. Where I'll even do that, like, you know, with sex scenes. Like, I don't know, I'm not a prude, of course, by any means, because I write sex in my books, but there's some things that you should just imply, or I would prefer implied. So it's kind of the same with violence. Like, you know, somebody, you know, comes in with a knife and they're looking at this other character. Like, readers are smart. They can infer what's going to happen. You don't need to show every slice and dice motion.
Right.
And that can almost be more impactful for readers too.
Yeah,
if they have to then
imagine it.
Imagine it. And everyone brings their own,
Right.
you know, in the imagining their own personal experiences and maybe like, you know, aspects of other memories from other books that they've read. And so their experience with that scene is going to be, everyone's is going to be very different anyway. So it's kind of nice to leave some of that to the imagination and let, you know, it's like maybe some people will feel more affected by those scenes than others based on their own experiences.
That's exactly.
But I feel like there are books where, I don't want to say gratuitous violence works, but like really being in the moment. To like say like Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. You know, like you see this horrible stuff that happens to her. So it's like, then as a reader, you're just as angry and you want her to get revenge, you know? So I think, depending on like.
I love that scene.
And I think, but depending on how much that plays into your character, like for ours, it's more, I don't say just their backstory, but it's ingrained in their DNA now. It's part of who they are, but that's not, we're focusing on moving the story forward. We're not looking back.
Right.
And like, it's not happening in the present. So you don't need to.
That's exactly right. Yeah, no, and I think that's a good choice. But I think it is interesting about that, you know, that with these darker books, oftentimes we do see, you know, the real violence. So the fact that it's implied, but I think the idea that the reader fills in his or her own experiences is true. And people who read our types of books read a lot of our types of books. So they, you know, like you said, they know the knife comes out, they know, they kind of know what's going to happen.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about the men in these women's lives. Cause there's no sort of like brutish, I mean, there are peripherally, but not the two main men, you know, Hudson and Tim, we were talking earlier about how I think they would get along, because there's sort of like there's like a modern chivalry to both of them. But tell us a little bit about sort of you know, their backstories, because I think that's another thing that you guys do a really good job of. They're not the main characters, but they're very big characters in the book. And you know, Tim's emerged over a few books. So tell us a little bit about Tim.
He's kind of her classic like foil, you know, her right-hand man, but he's also a very optimistic personality type, whereas she tends to kind of expect the worst. And so his approach to investigating kind of tempers her, you know, let me just run in, you know, guns blazing kind of, which is probably what she would do under many circumstances if he didn't kind of reel her back in. And that,
well, that's her history, right? I mean, she feels like she needs to have a gun ready. And I think he hasn't had that experience.
And he's also a local, having grown up and only worked in Alexandria Bay, whereas she has this background with the NYPD. So she's seen a lot more violence than he has, and she is conditioned to expect more violence. But then what happens in this book is there's a relationship, a personal relationship that's evolving between them. So now they work together, but they also have this burgeoning romance. And so it's a lot about her discomfort with that and trying to figure out how to continue to be professional while on the job and, you know, give their full attention to, especially the crimes that then emerge during pirate days.
Right.
But at the same time, everything that happens on the job potentially can affect their relationship once they get back home.
Of course, right.
Of course.
Right.
So,
and such a small pool. We're not talking about like these women, you know, they don't have like, she doesn't have a million options.
Yeah. Slim pickings.
Slim pickings.
I think Tim too, like what I notice about him is he like always sees the good in people.
Yeah, that's right.
Which it, like could be to his detriment sometimes.
Yeah.
So like he tends to give people the benefit of the doubt and he sees the good in them and the potential, but like it's an interesting juxtaposition for his job as a police detective, but it's also like so wholesome that he hangs on to that.
It's cute. And I think the other thing that's interesting about it is I think we have to be more prepared for violence. Violence is way more likely to happen to us than it is to men. So there's moments when I kind of sense Shayna being like a little impatient, like, you know, it's like it's the little unrealistic, Tim, your view of the world. And yet I think he's such an important anchor for her because I think she could get really lost in her darkness. Yeah, definitely. So that is what, and I think that's the sign of a really fun sort of duo, is that the conflict comes a lot just from sort of the nature of the way they look at everything, right? That is really, it's fun to read. And that is this, I feel that way with, you know, so talk about Hudson, because he's very different, but also sort of his own chivalrous.
Hudson was fun to write. Like he was fun to explore because he is a police detective, but I feel like, I mean, I think anybody who's like going to write police, the intent is always to humanize those characters, to make you care for them on a human, personal level. So I really wanted to do that with Hudson of like, you know, he's a human first, he's a detective second. And give him real insecurities because I have like many friends who are detectives and he actually like he has a lot of personality traits, I guess, that I've seen in like real people, real detectives. So I wanted somebody who like is insecure because I didn't want to just write that alpha male, ego driven, you know, sort of stereotypical cop that we see a lot of the time. And also somebody who's opposite of Nikolai Cole. Like Nikolai Cole is like, we got him last book. He's very sure of himself. He's very confident, very competent. And then now you have a character who could use a little bit of that.
Right. How to balance him out. But also, I mean, so talk about his job, because I think one of the things that makes him so human is how hard he struggles with the kind of work he's doing.
Yeah. So Hudson's assigned to sensitive crimes. As a new detective, like sensitive crimes, at least like from my experience, what I know, is not like a very desirable position because of the subject matter. It is a lot of like child victims. A lot of the times it's really hard stuff. So Hudson gets sensitive crimes because nobody else wants it. And something I talked to my friend who was a detective in sensitive crimes for many years, and she said it's just this overwhelming feeling that you're drowning all the time. You're drowning in casework, and you look at these piles of cases, and she's like, how do you prioritize them? Like, how do you say one person's trauma is more or less important than somebody else's
injuries? Is
so
hard.
And then you have a place like Black Harbor where they're just going to keep stacking up. So like that drowning comes back, and like the imagery of the lake and everything like that. He's always feeling like he's drowning. But so he really struggles with being in sensitive crimes, especially because his heart's not in it. He wants to be in robberies so bad. So then when this this robbery gone wrong happens, and like his friend gets murdered, he wants so badly to solve that case and prove himself. But
and it's such an interesting dynamic between him and Morgan too. They don't have, you know, as much immediate contact, for example, as Shayna and Tim have, because
they were together,
but there is contact between them, and there is this kind of, they're coming from such different places, and that really plays well, I think, on the page.
Well, and then, you know, Hudson, like Morgan, is a product of Black Harbor, but you see how he's, you know, sort of come up differently, or he's very much kind of a fear-driven character. So he has fears because of everything that he knows is in his environment. And then, you see how Morgan reacts to that. And I think like you were talking about, like with women having to be on the defense, like she's a very defensive, a very sort of like hard shell character.
Yeah. Yeah. With good reason. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, and in The Widowmaker, there's a little bit of a triangle, right? Because we have the Reynolds. There's a very, one of the Reynolds family members is also very active in the plot, and so then we get to sort of see, the way that Hudson sort of his sort of suspicion about that whole family and all that old. So he's also he's sort of protective of this character, this woman that he kind of barely knows, right?
Right. And Morgan is she's a very like hard, kind of scary like person, but she's also very childlike as well, because of like what happened in her past. She's very much stuck in that sort of just being a child.
Right.
So she's underdeveloped in a lot of ways. And so when she goes into the Reynolds mansion, she talks about, sort of being thrown to the wolves and like what's going to happen, but she's also extremely curious.
Right.
And Hudson, I mean, because he is a gentleman, doesn't really want to sort of use her, but he sees the opportunity that they have, that she's a photographer who's literally been invited in to their home, and he wants to see what she knows or what she can find out.
Right. Yeah, it's all set up for so much exciting drama. So, okay, so these are both coming out on December 6th.
Yes. St. Nick's Day.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
It's fun.
I know, that is so fun. That doesn't I guess it must happen plenty, but this is my first, and you can see I'm doing a not a good job of figuring out who's on what side of me. But okay, so these are coming out December 6th.
Yes.
So exciting. And I have my other one here on my screen, which is so exciting. I love these covers. Am I getting a good vision of that?
Yeah, you have the bridge in yours.
Yeah,
you do have the bridge.
Now we both have a bridge connection.
Oh God, I know. That's hilarious. The water. I love that you guys are both afraid of the water. That's something
terrified.
That's a whole other
something to explore over drinks tonight, maybe.
Yes. Yeah.
So tell us what is next. What are you guys working on?
I am working on a 5th Shayna book that will be out in late 2023, which is also set in the Thousand Islands and involves Shayna's niece who comes to stay with her because she's having a lot of problems at home, and the teenagers spend a lot of time on this one kind of abandoned island, and murder occurs. And so it's going to be a little bit of a different perspective, because of course it's still about Shayna and about Tim and their relationship, and it's of course about a murder mystery that occurs in the town, but now there's also this much younger cast that will be involved.
Right. And then another layer of like family for Shayna, right? Like more stress, more family stress. Shayna needs poor Shayna. No more family stress.
Much family therapy.
I know. Actually, all of our characters need to be in therapy. And then you're working on another book in Black Harbor.
Yeah. So Dead Ringer is the 3rd Black Harbor book, and it will feature different protagonists, but I mean, like The Widowmaker, you'll see familiar faces.
Yes, that was really fun. Because in their own ways, Hazel shows up, and then we see Nikolai. Yeah, it was really fun. I was like, wait, oh my God, go back, read that again and again. So fun. So okay, so Dead Ringer.
Yeah, so Dead Ringer is about a medical examiner this time, and so it's a medical examiner, and she goes to investigate a murder of her daughter's best friend. Her 15-year-old daughter's best friend has been murdered, and then she finds out later that night that her daughter is missing. So it's sort of, the bodies kind of stack up. They're looking for this, they're trying to solve these murders, but also find her daughter at the same time. So yeah, it's been interesting having a character who's a medical examiner, who's very closely connected to police, but who is not a detective herself, but still, very much deals with death and kind of investigations. It's been a trip.
It's fun. I have a whole series of the medical examiner. I love.
I
thank you. Well, I loved writing about.
I'm gonna have to pick your brain.
Anytime. And actually, I have a really great contact for us. the chief medical examiner of the state of North Carolina.
That's awesome.
It's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah.
You have to, that's what I think we sort of talked about a little bit, is the idea that you have to sort of have your experts and share them. And you know, one of the fun things about being here in person, which of course we almost never get to do, right, is like what it's like to sort of be able to like, you know, find your people and talk about, you know, because of course our spouses, our, you know, friends at home, they hear us talk about the, you know, plot problem, or I'm stuck on a book, or my book, or, you know, a bad review, whatever. There's all the drama of being of our world.
Yes.
But to be then with people who like really know, right?
Who live it every day. There's no substitute for opportunities like this, right? To just connect with other thriller, especially other women thriller writers in person and share experiences and support each other.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we're at VoucherCon, which actually, if you haven't heard of it, it's the World Mystery Convention, which is sort of funny because we're not really mystery writers, but they include now, they take in even the thriller and suspense authors. Although for a long time they didn't love us.
They'll take us.
They'll take us now. But it's also readers, which I think makes this conference. So we also all went to Thriller Fest in New York, which is just really writers.
Yeah.
But this is a reader conference, and it's really interesting. It's just a different dynamic, right?
Yeah.
And you get people to come up and, you know, they talk about they've been reading your books. You know.
Yeah, it's really fun.
It is really fun, and we're in Minneapolis, which I don't know who anybody out there is in Minneapolis, but it was beautiful. It was really warm and lovely, and it's really fun to be together. So. Although now it's raining, it looks like so. But we're inside, right? We don't even really leave the hotel.
No,
we're so happy to be together, and we're all like, my voice is going because I, you know, staying up too late and talking too much.
So much talking, just so much talking. So much wanting to catch up in person.
Yeah.
I mean, we all talk obviously online a ton, but it's totally different when we get
interaction.
the FaceTime.
It's totally different. And I actually kind of encourage people, you know, who are listening to go and find your favorite authors online too, because I think the thing about being an author is it's really pretty lonely. I mean, right? And it's a lot of time spent inside your own head, literally. And I think it helps to hear from people who are like, you know, this part of your, you know, this struck me, or, I mean, not if you're going to say something really mean, but if you're, you know, if you've enjoyed something or it touched you in a certain way, it really makes a difference, I think, to the people who are writing books in their basements by themselves.
Like too, because the three of us met online.
That's right.
I know, in person.
And here we are in person, IRL. It's so fun. So we'll look for these books on December 6th. I'm going to flip them now so I have the right one. It's so weird. It's such a like optical illusion to be like, where is, I'm literally thinking that, you know, guys on the outside.
It's okay.
December 6th, The Widowmaker, The Kind to Kill. I'm assuming Kill will be death, or Kill will be in the next title.
The next title is Early Grave.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Great.
So, you know, tangentially related.
Yes, I like it. I like a theme. I like it.
I like that.
So look for these on December 6th. And until next time, this is Killer Women with Hannah Morrissey and Tessa Wegert. Thank you for joining us. Bye.
Bye.